the Illinois Department of Commerce and Economic Opportunity. Mark Batista, Interim Dean, Sustainability, Business and Career Technology from Elgin Community College. Dan Deasy, Manager of Adult Education and Continuing Education Operations at the College of DuPage. And Peggy Heinrich, the Interim Vice President of Teaching, Learning, and Student Development at Elgin Community College. Thank you all. Welcome to our presenters. At this time, I'd like to turn it over first to Mike Baker and let him go ahead and do his part of the PowerPoint. Go ahead, Mike.
Thank you, Bevan. And thank you for joining us this morning, everyone. We're going to run through some slides here real quick. Some of these are for your information later, and so some will kind of skim by, but others we'll do a deeper dive into. So regardless of if we are public, private, in education, economic development, workforce development, if you're a data guru, or if you're into training, the one thing that we are all striving toward, so far as I can tell in all my conversations, is prosperity for our communities. If we have jobs that are available that are, good career pathways, family-sustaining jobs, the workers have money to inject into the local economy. And if the workers are there that have the right skills, then employers can be more productive, more competitive, and have better jobs available. So it's very much a symbiotic relationship. But at the end of the day, regardless of what role we each play in the process, at the end of the day, this is what we're striving toward. If you talk to site selectors, individuals that are responsible for either relocating or deciding where companies are going to expand, one of the top issues, if not the top issue that they have in their mind in these days, is the quality and the quantity and the adequacy of a skilled workforce. So it's very much a prosperity issue, an economic development issue, that our talent pipelines in each of our regions and our entire state are an asset. So the stronger we can make that asset, the more robust we can make our talent pipeline, the better competitive position we have in the national and global economies. I mean, it's just, it's more important than incentives. It's maybe the only thing that might trump it is geography. But once they've narrowed down to a general region of the country, then the talent pipeline becomes the critical issue. So let me ask you this kind of rhetorically. What does business engagement mean to you? I'd like everybody to think about that, because there is a wide spectrum of levels and degrees of business engagement. Over my years in workforce development, I've seen places where folks insisted they had strong business relationships and they could get people to show up to meetings, but when it actually came time to get their hands dirty, some of those same employers were nowhere to be found, and there's a reason for that. And over the years, I've seen places where individuals have told me, yeah, we can have employers there, they will participate in what we're doing, and they actually follow through. And so I've kind of done some comparing over the years, and I can see how that develops and why it happens. And we'll get into some of the details of that as we go through this. One of the things to be aware of is soft engagement. Technically, you've got an employer that says, okay, yeah, I understand what you're doing, I'm willing to play, I'll show up at a meeting. But if you ask them to go beyond that, or if you have, you need them to engage in information or talk to their peers, they're less willing, that's a red flag. For example, in one company, one large company that will remain nameless, has facilities in several places in Illinois and outside of Illinois. They were going through a restructuring and were having a situation where some folks were being laid off at various places. In one area of the state, the company rolled out the red carpet for our rapid response staff. made sure all the employees impacted by the layoff were told, okay, go see these folks at this place and this time. They'll have information. They can get you signed up for all the benefits you're entitled to, possible retraining, and you know, make sure you go talk to these people. In another area of the state, the company, the very same company, wouldn't let our people even know who was impacted by the layoff. And the only reason for that difference was the level and quality of the long-term relationship or long-term business engagement that had been practiced over many years. Okay, so this is important stuff, because if you do it well, everything else you do that revolves around employers will be so much easier. But if for some reason you have problems with this, conversely, everything else you do is going to be much more difficult. Okay, that's from our perspective. Well, we need to think about business engagement from the private sector perspective as well. So what do you think engaging with our systems means to them? Let me give you an example. There was one large company that announced they were hiring, doing a massive hiring over a period of months. Well, everyone came out of the woodwork. You know, politicians, some of the colleges, our program in workforce, business development reps, everybody descended on this company in a very uncoordinated, one-at-a-time fashion, and they eventually threw up the stop sign and said, please wait, go get your act together, and then come back and talk to us, because you're all saying essentially the same thing, and we're confused. We don't know what's going on with all of your different programs and the nuances. We need some organization here. So one thing to keep in mind also is there's also just a general anti-government bias in America. It is what it is. I'll just let you all kind of see these quotes as they come up over, and these span decades. But this is kind of what we're fighting against. The one here that really shocks me is the one from Senator Moynihan, because I didn't realize it, but way back when, he was actually a Secretary of Labor for the United States government. So he's probably the most embedded in what we're all doing of all these folks. But you know, it's kind of cliche, especially this one with Reagan. You know, I'm from the government. I'm here to help, but boy, there's a lot of truth to it. You know, it's funny because it's true, right? So this is what we're fighting against. You know, we all have good intentions. We all show up to a business, and we want to talk about what we can do for them. But from the business perspective, they see all these different departments coming at them, and each pointing a slightly different direction, and it gets chaotic in a hurry. So how do we get from where we're at and how we operate to where they need to be? Well, first we have to start partnering. The new Workforce WIOA Act, you know, requires us to partner, strategic plan together, requires integrated program services, and things like that. So we're going to have to start doing this just to be compliant with the law, but we need to do it because it makes sense, you know, at the end of the day. So one of the strategies, and this is kind of at the building block stages here in Illinois, but is figuring out a framework that anybody that is going out to talk to a business from the public sector knows what the other partners that are doing the same thing are doing. And more than just being aware of what they're doing, but starting to work in a aligned, coordinated, and hopefully eventually integrated fashion where rather than everybody sending their person out individually, we have one business team that uses, you know, the similar strategies in our region, and all the partners that need to be engaged are engaged. So that's cross programs. So will that be easy to accomplish? No. I mean, It's all about relationships, and where relationships need to be improved, there's groundwork that needs to be laid to make this happen. But there are places across the country that have accomplished this, so it is possible, but it doesn't happen overnight. And I'm not going to dive into sector strategies a whole lot. We have a ton of information on this on our website. But in places that are doing this sort of thing, employers have come together and decided, okay, these are the things that we all have the same challenges about. These are the same things we all have the same opportunities about. Okay? And they decided to work together. And where they've done that, they now have one voice in that region for that sector of the economy, and they can provide an informed funnel of communication back and forth. One place in Illinois that this works very well is in Vermilion County, with the Vermilion Advantage Group. If a government program goes to talk to an employer there, if they're a member of this collaborative, and there are over 60 employers in that county that are members, their first question is, have you talked to Vermilion Advantage? And if you haven't, you need to go talk to them first. So it keeps all the employers on a level playing field, because Vermilion Advantage works for the benefit of all the employers. And by doing that, they can become an informed go-between between all the employers and all the programs, and help them figure out what makes sense to work on and what it makes sense maybe to defer until later or not involved with at all. Okay. So when you have a sector partnership forming, the important thing to remember is that the people at the table when this happens are your champions from the private sector and the other employers. So all the blue dots sitting at the table are employers. Okay. Now, your conveners, all your other education, training programs, workforce, community-based organizations are all in the room and hear what's going on. But the point is, the champions and the employers get to determine what matters to them. And then it's up to all of us to figure out, okay, this is what matters to them. Now, how can we work together in the public sector to address the issues and concerns and opportunities that they've identified? And some of these issues may be totally out of the government's ability to impact. That's okay. But of the issues that are, we need to work together better to help them achieve their goals. Because remember, the bottom line, it's not about us. It's not about you. Whether you love or hate Phil McGraw, it's not about you is very appropriate in this. We're not asking businesses to participate with us because they should do us a favor, or because it's it's the right thing to do, or it helps our program, or helps our participants or our students. The company's focus is profit, is being competitive. It's being able to expand. It's being able to react to market changes. If it impacts their bottom line, they care deeply about it. If it makes them more productive, makes them more competitive, it matters to them. If it doesn't do that, it doesn't matter quite so much, if at all. So we have to keep that in mind when we're talking to employers. So how do we go about that? What do we have to worry about and know and understand about how employers operate? Well, first of all, are we operating a push model or an employer pull model? Push model, we used to call, or sometimes still call, the old train and pray, where we run people through a program regardless of what the demand is in a region, and then hope as many as possible get jobs. But what if we could switch that to more of a pull model, where the employers are able to let us know as quickly as possible? And again, there are challenges in that, because sometimes things like the weather impact their plans, which is absolutely unpredictable. But where they do know they're going to expand or move into a different product line, some of those things they know far enough in advance that they could give us early warning that here's what we're going to need down the road. So it won't be perfect, but we can do a better job of understanding these variables. And so when we have this data and we have this information, we can move away from training and praying to more reactive and more nimble approaches at providing people with the skills that will help them get jobs, which helps our communities be prosperous, at the bottom line. So, if we can do all of these things, if we can help businesses increase their productivity and efficiency, increase their profitability, and lower their risk, virtually raise your hands here. How many you know of an employer that loves more risk and more uncertainty? I hope no one raises their hand there, because those are the things they hate. But if we can help them lower their risk, if we can help them expand into new lines of operation or grow new operations, help them retain their best employees. If we can do all of these things, then we are value added for business. So if you have a sector partnership in place, you can move away from these items on the right where you're doing one-off engagement with employers, and you start to work with groups of companies. Rather than reacting to specific situations, you can be more industry-driven. You can be more about doing things that matter to the businesses and less worried about a program first and worrying about our own program performance measures first, and be more generally successful because you're doing things at a larger scale and you're doing things that are effective. So if you think of lean approaches or lean processes here, it allows us to get away from doing things that are less value added and doing things that are more value added, both for ourselves, our students, our participants, and our businesses and communities. So what are some do's when you are engaging with a business or trying to engage a business? First of all, you got to understand what's going on in their industry as best you can. So when you start talking to them, you have some clue as to what they're talking about. One of the important factors is, where are the employers in the supply chain? Are they at the front end dealing with raw materials, or at the back end where they're getting product to market? Or in most cases, they're somewhere in the middle of that. You've got to be able to establish a relationship. So you can't count on them to come to meetings you're calling. Get out and go to them. Get known. Go to them. One meeting I was at, one business manager said, "Wow, all the stuff you're telling me is great. Why don't I know about your program?" And the staff responded, "Well, we've been trying to get to you for a year and a half, but we can't get past the front receptionist." So you've got to leverage people to make introductions. Use the networks that are out there, and you get up the highest level you can, or access to the highest level you can in that business. This is one of the most important items. Ask your questions, get the rest of the story, as Paul Harvey used to say. Sometimes what businesses tell you and what they really are saying might be slightly different. We all have our jargon and our, the way we talk in our programs, and it's easy for us to think that we're communicating when really we're not. An old adage goes, the most important mistake in communications is the misunderstanding that actually occurred. Okay. So you just want to make sure that you are validating your homework, to get a reality check with them, and try to get to the root causes of what the issues are. Businesses will have lots of issues they want to talk about, but you got to drill down and figure out what's causing that. Let's not just talk about the problem, but let's try to get to what the root cause is, and we can start addressing something. This one goes back to what I was talking about earlier about they care about profitability and competitive position. So if you've helped a company and you've helped them become more competitive, you've impacted their bottom line in a good way, get a small statement from them, or a video even if you can. But word of mouth is golden. So if you've helped somebody, having that statement that you can show other employers, or better yet, if you can get them to talk about it in the community, is golden. You can't buy enough good word of mouth. And of course, make it easy. You know, don't introduce red tape that's not necessary. Talk in plain English and make sure that you're communicating. And perhaps most of all, these relationships are long-term deals. Cold calling businesses to try to get them engaged is probably the worst thing to do. You want to be known to them. You want to be a partner with them. But it can't be a, you know, send a Christmas card once a year. You know, you've got to follow up regularly without being a pest. So there's some art to that. Okay, so what don't we do? First of all, don't waste their time. If you have employers who are willing to come talk to you, willing to come to a meeting, willing to give you input, for goodness sakes, don't just take their input and put it on a shelf and forget about it, because you get one or two of those kinds of things, and then all of a sudden they stop showing up and they will disengage. So if they're giving you input, be sure to act on it in whatever way you can. Or if your program can't or your services can't, you know, try to get them connected with who can. But at least let them know that you've heard them and you're doing what you can to help out. You know, don't get out of your silo. Let's all communicate together. Again, you know, just be available. You know, we don't want to go in with a sales job. We just want to make them aware of what we have available and our willingness to try to make what we have available better for them and work with them on that. You know, manage their expectations. It's easy to misinterpret comments, so you want to make sure that you're on the same page. And again, do not take the relationship for granted, because if you go through the motions on this, it will become apparent, and you'll have the situation where employers will show up for a meeting, but when it comes to trying to get people placed or have them do some tangible engagement with you where you're working on very specific things, it won't happen. So here are some questions that you might want to ask your businesses. And so we won't need to read all of these, but I want to point out a website that's available, Cost of a Hire. Many businesses, especially smaller ones, don't know what it's costing them to fill a vacancy. Well, this website was developed by, I think, AMS maybe, one of the national manufacturing groups. And it's out there available for free, and you plug in all your data, and it'll tell you what it costs to fill a position. And one company we were working with, they figured out this was millions of dollars a year. So it opened their eyes to some changes they need to make to address some turnover and retention issues. Okay. Item 6, that's an important one, as well as number 4. But you can read those later at your leisure. But these are all important questions for you to understand and have them think about. Here are some other things that you all can think about as you're going through your engagement processes. So the key takeaways, this is my last slide. Move away from the train and pray model. Be sure to speak their language. Act on what they tell you. And remember, this is a long-term deal that requires care and feeding and relationship building. And be a solution, not an obstacle. If you help them be more competitive, you will have a friend for life. Bevan, do we want to do questions at this point, or do we want to wait for later?
I think it'd be good to open it up for questions for you, Mike, at this time, if that'd be okay with you.
Yeah, whatever you want to do. So if anybody has any questions, I'd be happy to take them. Otherwise, we can move along.
I have one.
Yeah.
We are currently using like labor market information, the local and regional plans, and we focus on employability skills to drive the focus of our ICAPS programs. And what I was wanting to know is, how can our ICAPS programs, our integrated programs, result in industry recognized credentials connect to this business team so that our students can be connected to those employers?
Well, again, that's just about establishing relationships. So your faculty, your administrators should work to try to develop relationships with the economic development staff in your regions, develop relationships with industry associations, with key employers, because many employers don't hire directly out of programs. They hire from smaller firms around them. And then when they steal employees from someone else, then other opportunities open up for lower skilled, more entry-level people. So it's understanding, the dynamic of where employers source their candidates from that will give you clues on who is most likely to be most benefit from your services. I hope that answered that.
Yes, I think it did.
And I did mean to mention earlier, and I kind of glossed through it, but LMI data, be sure to, when we say partner with workforce and economic development, workforce means the Wagner-Pizer program and employment security. So they're business services people who go out and do this regularly. They're labor market data people that are economists are all over the state. If many of these folks have relationships with businesses and business associations already. So if you don't have one, you might want to start with these guys because they may already be in the door there. So you don't need to go in on your own and try to wing it. Have one of these groups give you a handshake, and get in the door through them. So that's all about leveraging, who knows whom.
Okay, thank you. At this time, we're going to, since seeing no other questions, but Mike, hang on because there may be some toward the end there, okay?
Okay, I'm going to mute and I'll hang around and listen.
Okay, great. Thank you for your presentation. I'd like to, at this time, kind of talk to our ICAPS Model 1 presenters and ask them to share some information with you. Mike has shared the perspective of the Department of Commerce and Economic Opportunity in terms of building capacity and looking at the employment areas in your area. What has your program done to address pressing employment and training needs in your region? Peggy, I'll start with you.
And I'm actually going to let Mark Batista here respond to that one to start with.
Sure. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Thank you. There have been a few different strategies we've taken here at Elgin Community College. I would say one through our advisory board meetings that we have that are related to our different programs. Within those advisory boards, we're meeting regularly over the course of an academic year, and within those advisory boards, we have the businesses that are there representing the manufacturing or HVAC, representing their different areas. So in those instances, we have some of those clusters of businesses together meeting regularly, as Mike had described. That would be one area. I would also state that we have memberships, so we've gone out and gained memberships in certain organizations, associations that also have businesses involved. One of the organizations is the Fabricators and Manufacturing Association. So different community colleges are part of that. It's also made up of hundreds of businesses locally, but even nationally. I would also state we, aside from the advisory boards and getting input from businesses there, we also have a coordinated effort to outreach to businesses, and we go out and actually visit these places of employment regularly. I'm probably out there once a week visiting different CEOs with a position here at our institution that directly reports up to the president. So all of that interaction between businesses and the college routes through that one position, and then myself or other involved parties would be then extended and part of those conversations, meeting the businesses at their locations, and seeing what they do essentially. Last one, I would state we at Elgin Community College, specifically in my area, use certain software to identify what the need is locally and regionally. Burning Glass is the one, MZ is another that we've used. So through these these different strategies, this is how we try to respond to the need of the areas, in a sense.
Okay, thank you, Mark. Dan, would you like to address how COD does this?
Sure. Many of those things that were mentioned, we do also. I would add on, we also focus on targeted municipalities. So we go to the municipality and discuss economic development and how our educational programs could fit some of the needs that have been identified by that municipality, working through their chamber and directly with employers. And we found that if there's buy-in from the municipality, there's certainly the additional interest on the part of employers to come to the table and discuss their needs when there's a partnership between the specific township, municipality, the employers, and we focus on a sector within each municipality. But the employers that come to the table and the educational institutions that are supporting and trying to provide the training and services to meet the needs, both of in the interest of the municipality's economic development and the specific businesses there. Also, I think one of the something that we've learned from going out to different employers is that, you know, we went out with this kind of a higher thought of providing the higher level trainings, and that's kind of all we were focusing on for a period of time to get into those, you know, mid-range jobs as a starting point, kind of ignoring the entry-level jobs, when a lot of the feedback we were getting from employers was, we want those entry-level jobs and we need X, Y, and Z, you know, to have the employee to have these certain skills for the entry-level jobs. So we kind of come to the realization that we should be focusing on two different tracks, and, you know, meeting the employers where they need and the skills that their workforce needs at multiple levels across the company. So that was kind of a learning curve on our end. We were only focusing on some of those higher level positions, and in many cases that's not what the employers need. So and as I said, many of the things that were mentioned we also focus on.
Okay, thank you. Peggy, can I ask you a question? And then I know this is not one of the questions I had sent to you, but what would you or do you do if the employers that you're meeting with indicate a need that you currently do not have an ICAPS for?
Oh, that's interesting. Well, I mean, the first question is, if employers are indicating that they have a need for trained employees, I'm coming back and connecting with Mark. So I guess my point here is that a lot of our ability to be responsive with ICAPS makes it very necessary to get over our silos and have full integration within the college in our response. And so we tend on the adult ed side to do things on our own. This model can't be successful that way because, you know, Mark is going to have more awareness of his program options that exist already, and whether or not the skill set lends itself to a student that's coming from the adult education side, or if it's really too high, or is it appropriate for an ICAPS model, and all of those things. So you wouldn't kick the relationship to the curb, but the solution may or may not involve ICAPS depending on the positions they have available.
Correct.
But the college can still respond.
I would also add that, yeah, in the response, it may work for ICAPS, it may not, depending on the need of the business and potentially the level of the student, you know, their skill level. But to Peggy's point, we can outreach to our workforce development side, who can potentially pick up and respond immediately to the businesses through non-credit, or if it's something we offer on the credit side that is useful for them, we can, you know, work with them, and we've done it in the past and continue to do it. So.
Well, and to that point, this presentation is about ICAPS Model 1 programs, and the ICAPS Model 2 programs are the ones that more specifically deal with the workforce development side of the colleges, or in terms of a community-based organization with the employer aspect of it. Dan, would you like to add anything to that question I asked Peggy?
No, not right now, no.
Okay. All right, then we'll go on to the next question. how does what you have done to address these needs that you addressed in the first question link with your labor market information, with your local workforce plan, and with your regional plan? Dan, we'll start with you.
Well, when we were establishing which programs to offer within the ICAPS 1 model, we did work directly with our workforce board and our one-stop, in addition to speaking with employers. But we aligned our offerings with the data that they were providing as far as both current and projected workforce needs within our service region. And we've also aligned our offerings to both the local plan and the regional plan. So our focus, our industry focus, aligns directly with the data showing the trends in labor needs, as well as what was integrated in both plans. So.
Okay, Mark, would you like to add to that?
Yeah, sure. I mean, a lot of what Dan had mentioned is similar to our area in ECC. From labor market data indicating that manufacturing in this area was important. These are, half of the programs we offer here at ECC in terms of the ICAPS 1 model. I would also caveat that getting programs up and running as responding to industry, it makes it a lot more successful if the faculty are on board, obviously, because it will. There have been a handful of great faculty members that have been leaders in getting these up and running. So.
Okay, great. Peggy, do you have anything to add, or are you good?
No, I say that's where Mark is essential, is helping to get faculty identified and on board.
Okay. All right, then we'll go on to the next question. Would you share with us any considerations that you have found necessary for expanding capacity of your ICAPS Model 1 programs? Peggy?
Okay. A couple things I'll say about that. One is obviously funding, as it's a pricey model that pays off, but finding ways to support it, obviously. But I'm going to share a couple of things that might be specific to ECC right now. I think part of how you scale it is by finding additional resources. And here we're doing that through a Title III grant currently. But in order to bring things to scale, we tried to respond in our effort to think about, what can ICAPS do? And we responded to what faculty were saying, which was, we want this for all of our students. The completion rates are an issue. Many of our students struggle academically. And we really want to see it expand. So in doing that, we've tried to make it apply to all students. And in doing that, I guess for the people on the phone who are trying to do this at a logistical level, I'm going to just share a couple of things that you want to think about if you're trying to do something like that. It means kind of coming outside of adult ed, where you're kind of a one-stop shop usually. You do your own registration and testing and enrollment, and maybe you're carving out seats and sections for ICAPS. You're taking that and you're trying to get out of that way of doing things and institutionalize. And when you do that, you're trying to use your college's registration and marketing and advising and new student orientation. And when you do that, it's a culture shift, for one, and you feel that hanging on the part sometimes of us in adult ed, but also the other folks needing to understand the needs in adult ed and address them and accommodate them. So a couple of practical things I'd think about were things like, how are you going to set up your classes now if everyone for us is now required to be in the model? That means they're all going almost full-time. And what are you going to do with students who don't want to go full-time and who don't perhaps need as much academic support? Are you going to have them all need to meet with one person for case management, or is that going to be woven into your advising? What do you do with the faculty who fear this kind of change will impact their enrollment? So there's lots of things that you have to think through. If you're really, the only way to financially handle this, I think, is to institutionalize it, which means using your existing resources. to absorb and address this instead of it being in isolation. And that's not easy to do. It's just as hard as implementing the grant in the first place.
Okay, Dan, do you have any considerations that you found necessary?
Well, financial considerations, as Peggy mentioned. So we, going after external private grants as well as additional public grants. Buy-in is extremely important across the institution, as Peggy mentioned, and the actual limitations on the number of students that we can get in the door. So, recruitment, whether you're working with employers directly and all the other means, it's fairly challenging to get someone to commit to something like this. So, obviously the expansion, you can only expand as much as you have people asking for your resources or programming. So that is another consideration. We tend to get fairly far ahead of ourselves as far as planning and development, and more focus, more attention needs to be paid to actually better explaining what's being offered in the recruitment side of things. So I would say fiscal resources and buy-in as well as the recruitment, the challenges within recruiting students.
Okay. Let's go on to the next question.
Hey, Bevan, can I interject something real quick on this one before we move on?
Sure.
The ultimate, you will know you've arrived. The ultimate expression of business engagement, if they see something that works and is working for them and making their lives easier and making them more competitive, they will invest resources into continuing an effort. So if you ever get a business or a group of businesses that'll put money in, you know you've arrived because you're doing something really great. And this can happen. I've seen it happen across the state. They will say, don't let money be the obstacle. If money's the problem, let's not let that be what stops us. And they will invest resources and make it happen.
Okay, thank you, Mike. What about any creative programming ideas that you have used in expanding your ICAPS programs? I think you guys shared some of those, but do you have any to add? Mark, would you like to start?
Sure.
If I unmute him, you will.
I would state that some changes in some of the ICAPS pathways, and it was relevant for ICAPS, but also as the program as a whole, was just some revision and modification of curriculum and making it quicker for students to complete. So instead of 2 semesters, they're obtaining a certificate, they're full-time, go in 1 semester. Basically also responding to input through those advisory boards that I had mentioned, changing some of the naming constructs of the programs so that it reflected what industry needs and what they are used to. So simply readjusting some of the curricula to encourage completion quicker.
Go ahead.
Also, in that, creative scheduling, block scheduling, condensing from 16 to 8 weeks blocks.
I was going to add to that in our effort when we were scaling up and doing this Title III change, that we did things like whatever you call that position, your ICAPS career navigator kind of position, we were able to bring back a couple of those positions, but this time we chose to house them in the career tech divisions in order to ensure that the program is integrated throughout the college and that they gain expertise and more knowledge in those areas.
That's a really good idea. Dan, do you have anything to add to that? Any other creative programming ideas that you've used?
I think, I already mentioned the approach of going through a municipality to kind of garner support within the local industry or business base seems to be effective. Some of the challenges that we have faced, even when we have employers at the table, is finding out specifically what they need, especially in the area of manufacturing. I've kind of talked about this before too. So we have direct employer engagement, but being able to meet those needs and satisfy them for future resources is fairly challenging in that many of the employers cannot specifically say what they want other than soft skills in employees. So we could certainly provide them those, and that's that lower tier kind of program. It's certainly not your Model 1, but addressing that challenge has been fairly, it's been a significant task, I would say. But yeah, outside of the municipality approach, I don't have anything else to add.
Well, I think, Mike, I'm going to ask you to kick in here because I'm reminded of one of your slides when you were talking that to address Dan's issue here is that sometimes there's a different jargon between employers and us, and what they're saying may not be what they're actually saying.
Exactly, and vice versa. One of the best things you can do is just ask probing questions, and maybe, especially in manufacturing, there are already lots of great nationally portable credentials that are out there that are industry recognized. Start with those and just go down the list of competencies that are aligned with those credentials and say, well, how about this? How about this? How about this? And even if an employer is not aware of the credential, most often they'll say, well, yeah, that's kind of what I'm looking for. So you can kind of start with a baseline of saying, okay, everybody that comes out of our program is going to have the skills related to this credential. And then if you need to build something on top of that or something specific to a particular business or group of businesses, you can certainly do that. But a great starting point for the discussion and framing the discussion in their context is starting with industry credentials.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to go on to the next question. How does your program serve ICAPS students in this current fiscal climate? I know it's a sticky wicket, but address it as best you can. Peggy.
I guess I'd say what I'd said earlier, which is you really have to be strategic in your grant writing in your college and ensure that you're, picking your student success initiatives that have proven to be successful. And if that's ICAPS, we found it was here, then using your college resources to try to garner further support for that program. Otherwise, it's very difficult if you're using adult ed only or relying on some startup funds to keep it going. And I think many are struggling with that right now.
Okay.
In terms of students, you got to look to all your available resources in terms of scholarships, in terms of other resources that you can provide, WIOA or WIOA screening on campus, that sort of thing.
Okay. Mike, did you say something?
Nice catch on the WIOA.
Oh, okay.
I would also add that these are the kind of things that don't necessarily require getting a grant to do. Because some of these are just smart business practices that if you make some modifications in how you operate and just embed these principles in how you go about your business, you're going to see benefits from it that don't necessarily require additional funding.
Okay. Dan, do you have anything to add?
No, we essentially do the very similar. We use a braided funding model. We've established institutional scholarships that support a large majority of our students. We work through our one-stop to access WIOA. I'm sorry, not WIOA. WorkNet funding. So very similar. Writing for private grants to establish it to help cover the cost of tuition, direct tuition for students and development. And other resources within our institution. So selling your program, selling the success, getting our foundation to back us and establish a pot of money for students. So just multiple avenues to bring in resources within the institution, and then certainly go after additional funding outside of your normal, the ICCB, state and federal funding streams.
Okay.
Hey, Ben, one of the things also to think about, I haven't heard anyone mention it specifically, is work-based learning, work-based training that's paid. So you may have students that are maybe a semester away from graduating. If there's a way to work them into a paid internship or a work experience that's supported by our program, that's certainly an option. But again, again, if you think about this as developing a talent pipeline, businesses that have the resources and the foresight can create a grow your own pipeline approach by using interns. So if you have instructors that can identify potentially good fits, or somebody that is adept at a particular skill, you might be able to leverage that knowledge and those connections and get students placed into something that's paid. So while it's certainly not the same as having a scholarship or tuition reimbursement, if you've got more money in their pocket, you end up with the same result. So that's something that I would encourage you all to think about as well.
Okay. At this time, I'm going to open it up so that we can just let all four of you say any other comments or suggestions you might have before we see if there's any other questions from the group. So, Mike, we'll start with you. Any other comments or suggestions you might have, and then we'll go on to each one of the others.
I guess I'll channel my Ty Webb from Caddyshack and just say, be the ball. Take the initiative, work together, and do all the things that people on the phone have been talking about, of not doing business as usual and thinking about creative ways to problem solve. If you end up on that and use that kind of as a guidepost, you should do just fine.
Okay. Dan, any other comments or suggestions?
I would also really know your service population well. What works here or what doesn't work here may not apply to other service regions throughout the state. So in addition to knowing your employer base and the needs, also know your student population very well.
Okay. Peggy?
I guess I'll reiterate what I said earlier, which is that, in adult ed, it hasn't historically been our focus to focus as heavily on employment and connecting internally with those who make those connections with the outside. And so as we're being pushed to do that through our new strategic plan and pushed throughout the RFP to do that in adult ed, you really have to do that in a real way and combine your efforts college-wide and sort of link hands and trying to look at ICAPS as one of the ways in which we're meeting the needs of our employers in the region.
Okay, Mark?
Nothing more than Peggy, so thank you.
We're distracted by a skunk that keeps walking by the window, so sorry about that.
Okay. At this time, I'm going to open it up to anyone having any questions or comments. We'll give you a little bit of time so that if you want to raise your hand, you may, to ask a question, and we'll call on you. Or you can type it into the chat box, whichever way you'd like to do that. So any questions or comments? I'm going to give you a couple minutes. Okay, I don't see any questions. So having said that, I would like to thank our presenters today, Mike Baker, Mark Batista, Dan Deasy, and Peggy Heinrich. Thank you all, and have a good day.